I think since this morning, we've had a number of speakers come and talk to us about digital trends. So I don't think we need to emphasize further the significance that digital has on businesses and on everything else that businesses are connected with today. At the core of all of this, there is a huge amount of technology innovation that's going on, and companies are increasingly adopting new technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning and everything else in order to transform themselves and innovate both their products and services and address the needs of their customers in a much better way. So it's no surprise that today you see more and more startups that are emerging that are disrupting proven business models. So on one hand, customers are having to go back and, or rather, companies are having to go back and innovate and as well as, transform their customer-facing processes. So which means everything related to how they acquire and manage the customers has to be different and new, and that has to be digital-centric. And on the other hand, you also have this trend where internal processes, systems, and tools also have to revamp. They all have to be digitized. So there's actually a strain that's happening across both sides of the value chain of how a company could today operate in. And again, startups, like I said, are coming back and disrupting their entire flow. So there's a lot of strain that existing customers are facing today in this digital world. The core of all of this transformation has an impact around how people operate in. And that's where it all lands. It's all about people and the capability that organizations have that can cater to this transformation requirements and also go back and address the transformation agenda that organizations set for themselves. So if it's all about people, obviously HR has a big role to play. And that's why the title that we have for today's discussion that I'm going to have with Manu is about new HR and also the role that HR needs to have in the digital world. So over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to attempt to have Manu share with us his experiences of actually having gone digital and how he shaped his people strategy within his organization. And then we're going to open it up for some questions so that you can have questions raised to Manu as well. So Manu, as I know him, is actually a very dynamic people leader, very transformative. In fact, Manu is based out of the US and he's traveled for this session. So please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.
I hope he's overcome his jet lag and you're going to have a great conversation today.
Thank you.
Manu is actually very interestingly placed because he's based out of the US where his customers are. And he spends as much time with his customers as he spends with his people. Most of his people are based out of India. So he's got a great perspective of how companies are transforming and the perspective that he has across multiple functions, as well as how he's actually innovating for the digital transformation agenda within his organization. So let's get started. So Manu, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So before we even get started, I wanted to sort of ask you this question about, how do you see the role of HR today in terms of leading this digital transformation? In other words, do you see HR as a leader, or do you see HR, leaders today actually being or playing a supporting role? I know it's a little controversial, but I thought we'll get started with that as we frame our context to the discussions today.
Yeah. Thanks, Arun. That's a good question. And my belief is that we can do, as HR professionals, we can do a lot more. We are doing, but it's not there yet. So, I'm sure forums like this transform our thinking to new levels, and we can do much more. My perspective is that in order for HR to be transformative and driving and leading the change and transformation, we need to innately understand the business. How does our company, our organization make money? My belief is that we don't spend enough time understanding the nuances of how the company makes money.
Okay.
So once you have that, we talk about the seat at the table. Once you have the seat, you should be able to contribute, and I think that will be the key factor.
Okay. So I know you've been driving a lot of change yourself within UST.
Yes.
So what has your experience been in terms of helping drive or helping shape the digital agenda that UST has had?
Correct.
And you've had it for almost now a few years.
Yes.
You've been ahead of several other companies in leading the transformation. So what's your personal experience been in driving this digital transformation?
Yeah, so the fundamental belief came from the fact that our business is going to be disrupted not by another technology company, but it's by the next startup, right? So it's the entrepreneurial ventures that basically disrupt your business model. So that led us to think, how do we change that? We also believe that you cannot have all the solutions to offer to your customers as a technology company, because technology is changing so rapidly, right? So how do you create a partner ecosystem? And how do you thrive in that ecosystem? How do you give your partners the opportunity? And in that ecosystem, you bring in the entrepreneurial companies, the startups, and the other technical companies that have an advantage in the market. That is on one side. Then you look at the talent inside the organization. How do you scale the talent for the skills that are required for the future? So we look at it and say, okay, here's our pyramid, and here's the composition of our pyramid. How should it look 5 years from now? And what should change? And what are some of the skills that we don't have? Like, we have a list of 5 to 10 different skills that we don't possess today inside the organization, and we know very well that that is required for the growth in the future. So how do you train our people? I mean, there are a lot of smart engineers in the organization. How do you train them? How do you upskill them? And obviously, providers like Pluralsight actually digitally accelerate that learning capability so that we can move with much more pace. But those are some of the high-level thought process. The other piece is, if you want to transform your organization and make it digital, you have to reduce the layers. It's not to pull people out of jobs, but leverage the people to do more, do different than what they are doing today. And you don't need the same set of people to do that work content or the job function. If it can be automated, the processes can be streamlined, and it can be done better. Yeah. So that's the thing.
Sounds like you're going to be dealing with a lot of change management related issues, obviously, because yes, once you reduce hierarchies, you're talking about new ways of doing running those processes internally. Right. Obviously, people are going to be a little impacted, and they're going to feel very apprehensive. But let's talk about change management in a while. Yeah. Let's understand from your perspective of having met with a lot of customers across the globe, the 21 countries that you operate in. How do you see organizations when they've actually launched their digital transformation strategy? Yeah. How much of an impact has that had on their people strategy per se? Yeah. And what do you see as organizations actually trying to deal with that? How have you seen them deal with that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting perspective across the different continents and how companies are operating. You find large banks that are in the top 10, struggling to make that shift as they are getting disrupted by digital banks and the neobanks, right? So how do they change? The leadership at the top is very aligned. They know what to do, but they cannot get the rest of the organization to move. So enterprise agility is one of the key things that HR can drive. So customers look to us to help them with the tools and the techniques and the coaching required to change the mindset of employees in their organization. Now, we can do that and create some amount of impact, but to do transformation at scale, it takes a completely different mindset, right? So you need to enable your talent. You need to rapidly accelerate talent development so that it percolates deep inside your organization. So that is something that we see all the time with customers, and it doesn't matter which part of the world. You're in Australia, you are in Europe, you will find these are the common problems. And that's a great consulting opportunity for companies like ours. But at the same time, you see that these corporations are not doing their change just in IT because it's digital, but they're doing that in finance, they're doing that in HR, they're doing that in facilities everywhere. In fact, one of the customers redesigned their entire office layout to make sure that it's collaborative. There are ideas being shared. It's more informal, so that there's a lot more connectedness between employees. So people go to that, or companies go to that extent to make that impact, because those small changes really create the differentiation or your competitive advantage in the market to move further.
Great. So you touched upon a very important topic, and you talked about the issue of scale. And I think, those who've been in the industry for many years understand that, disruptions are a part of life. We've all seen disruptions many times over. But I think probably what is unique about this digital disruption is that it has two components. One component is that of scale, that organizations, whatever they do, they have to transform at scale. Almost all parts of the organization today are impacted due to this. And the second issue that you look at is also speed. Yep. Because you don't have time. Today, you have to innovate at such a rapid speed today that if you don't, there is going to be another startup that's going to come and take away your business. It's not about large organizations taking away your business. It's the startups that actually come back and take that, which have a lot of agility. So the issue is, if you've touched upon skills and talent availability today, how do you think organizations need to look at a talent strategy, which is going to be different from the world that they've been used to?
Yep.
And that has to take into account both skill and scale. Speed and scale. So what's your thought on that, and how have you managed that at UST?
So for us, we look at where is it heading. I mean, we see a lot of change in technology. We are a technology company ourselves, and a lot of technologists are in the company. What we have found is that with the rapid change in terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning and all of those, it's a lot of buzzwords. Even though we have a lot of developers, they may not understand all of those nuances around it very well. So what we did to do things at scale, one of the things that we did was last year, we launched a developer conference for 1,500 of our top technologists. So this was around the theme of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we took them through it. We had eminent speakers from different parts of the world come in and talk about the topic and what is the implication, and take them through live sessions where they get trained. So once you do that, you've almost democratized these things, because the opposite, in my view, the opposite of complexity is familiarity. If you're familiar with it, things move much faster for you. So making employees familiar with all of these changes is much more critical. So that's one way to deal with scale, right? When it comes to speed, definitely digital tools will enable speed. If you're an organization, you have a lot of different software processes and applications helping that. But if you can make it, like we all have smartphones, we all use the consumer apps, and we have a certain level of expectation about its ease of use and the user experience and the interface and all of that. Enterprise apps need to get to that level. So in your corporation, there will be a lot of legacy applications that have not changed its look and feel and everything. So if you can change that and get in with a lot of these tools and techniques, that would help. Learning at scale. If you can digitally accelerate learning, that can move a lot of things in the company to enable it to be nimble and agile. So those are some thoughts.
So interesting thoughts. So how well do you think conventional training models are suited for the digital era today?
That's a good question. I think the convention, in the world of digital, right, learning can happen anytime, anywhere, on any medium. It is not constrained by time, space, or people. However, there are learning preferences. So, there could be a traditional classroom instructor-led learning model. I think the key is to blend. If you look at the trends, if you take an average third grade or fourth grade student in the US, the number of applications that they use in the classroom for their learning is much more, is at its highest point compared to any other grade. Third and fourth graders have maximum use of apps. And if you extrapolate that trend, right, in the next 15 or 20 years, them entering the workforce, their preference would be to go fully digital on learning, right? At least that's where it is trending. So, so the traditional models would evolve. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but it will evolve based on how user preferences would go. We remember the time when Kindle came and we said, hey, nobody's going to use that because we like the look and feel and touch of the book. But it's changing, and it's taking over. So I think preferences would change on the learning side.
That's a great point. In fact, what we see also in the industry, both in India as well as globally, is that learning preferences are an important aspect of managing change. People have different learning styles. Some of them, prefer to learn from others. Some of them prefer to learn on their own. Some of them are slow learners. Some of them are just-in-time learners. And therefore, what the digital age is also doing, as we've observed, is that learning is getting increasingly digitized, and therefore catering to the different learning styles, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
And that's a big shift in terms of how you can actually go towards skilling people at scale. One of the reports that I read, I don't remember who published that, but it actually said that in the digital world, given how agile organizations need to be in terms of transforming themselves, the average duration of a person who needs to be skilled and staffed into a project that can actually be digitally oriented has come down from about 90 days on an average to about 45 days. So which means that when there is a need for the business to transform, within 45 days, you've got to identify people with the right skills. And if you don't, you've got to basically find the people within your organization who have to be skilled, and they have to be trained to be delivered. Trained so that they can go back and deliver to that project. So what's your experience been within UST in terms of looking at rapid skilling?
Yeah.
And how have you actually achieved that?
So a few things what we have seen. One is the traditional process of bringing talent, fresh graduates into the company is to take them through a 90-day training program, intense boot camp, then have them shadow with the experienced talent. And then, over a period of 6 months from the date of joining, they become proficient at least to do a piece of the work. Right? That model is fast changing. What we've realized is that many of the fresh graduates who are joining the workforce today come with some proficiency, some understanding of technology. People would have tried some of the programming languages while they are in college. So they almost come with 3 to 4 years of experience in that area, right? So right now we're shifting the training model to say, well, how can you do e-learning, self-learn, and then take the tests and courses that we have. The other is, how do we train them where they work on business problems that we give them, and based on that, in campuses we give that, and then hire them based on how well they do. So rather than just take everyone in, look for the best and take. The numbers are also going down. I mean, that world is shifting where you initially had large army of engineers, and that's shifting to the few good people.
Okay.
So
that is more on quality of skills than the number of people that you
So
have.
what we have seen is, learning platforms, technology learning platforms actually help accelerate. I mean, Pluralsight obviously has Code School, which is a great feature because you reinforce your learning immediately, and that helps. So things like that. Or we do hackathons on critical business problems at scale. So last year, we launched a hackathon around AI, and we were expecting to get like 50 teams to participate. We had 200 teams participating. So that shows the amount of interest that the employees have. And most of them are applying these techniques around customers' business problems. So that adds to the charm of doing those kind of options to spread it around.
So you're actually building a lot of capability even before people join your organization. So on that related note, do you think, or would you agree that one of the key accountabilities or roles that HR has to play today is in terms of not managing people and processes, but actually looking at managing more of innovation? Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that, because HR today can increase the energy and the agility of the organization by focusing on the right things. Right? Innovation is critical for every organization to survive. And innovation, if you look at it, scaling that innovation is a hard act. And innovation typically happens at the edges of the corporation. And how HR's job is, how do you enable, how do you bring it back into the corporate funnel, right? So that it can all flow through. And that can only be done by emphasis on continuous learning, right? Organizations and employees can only adapt as fast as they can learn, right? So it becomes a very critical point. And HR is in a unique position today to look at it. I can tell you most of the conversations that we have at the leadership level and with the board of UST is about talent. Because do we have the right talent? Because at the end of the day, it's the people that compete and take your business forward.
Okay. So I know every organization today is attempting to put in a culture that can possibly look at people being part of a startup organization. I mean, that's the amount of innovation and agility that needs to be driven. I know you've done some work in that area, but could you elaborate on what you've actually achieved as a chief people officer of making a startup environment work within UST? So
Yeah.
how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, so a few things, I talked about the developer conference that we had last year. One of the things that came out is we did the hackathons associated with it, a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of passionate employees wanting to do something very different. So we said, hey, how do we make all of this a reality, right? So we started something called the UST Garage Ventures. It is our own incubator where we put the seed capital to take an idea to the next level. Now, the question is not just about money. It is about giving them the mentoring, giving them the technology leadership, and how do you help that? How do you build that culture? We have a strong offering on cybersecurity and fintech out of our centers in Israel. So one of the things that we did was, hey, there are a lot of smart engineers, but they don't have that whole product mindset. They are services mode engineers. How do they build the product? From that. So we're sending some of them to work with our colleagues in Israel, right, which is a startup nation, and they get it and much more advanced. And then we're collaborating there, and then the team comes back and works together to take the products to the finish line. So those are things that we are doing to create that environment. We have employees leaving and starting and funding things. We also have a lot of spin-offs. Interestingly enough, we spun off our cybersecurity offering. It's a separate company, and we did it for a reason. And it's very informal. The culture is very different. I mean, we have first name dot last name as our email ID, but they only have first name, right? And it's a different domain. So things like that, because you want to create it, you want to make sure that it succeeds, and you have the culture to make it agile and nimble.
That's great. I think this calls for an incredible amount of change management. Just coming back to the conversation that we started initially on change, HR has a big role to play in change management, because if you look at, reading any article that gets published in India today, it's all about jobs and job losses and automation taking away. And in that environment, HR has a big role to play. It's also challenging.
Correct.
What's been your experience in terms of managing change in a positive way?
Yeah.
Especially when you're looking at cutting hierarchies and, and making, everything flatter and more nimble. Correct. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are going to feel apprehensive about that change. So how have you managed that change yourself?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, initially it's about the awareness, right? I mean, we are telling our middle managers that the traditional role of a manager is shifting, and it's shifting rapidly, right? You're no more in a command and control mode. You're in a coaching and enablement mode. Your average engineer that works for you in your team probably knows much more about about the subject matter than you. So how do you control that? Today's employees have a lot of choices, right? They need not work in the company. They can go somewhere else and work. So how do we motivate them to work? And it's also the power of the teams. It's a network of teams versus the hierarchy. Now, when we first started talking, they looked at me like you're from some other planet, right? Because it's hard. It's kind of breaking their mindset around it, and they just thought it wouldn't work. Our belief is that, once you delayer, you can leverage that talent, unleash that talent, and upskill that talent to do much more. So we have a long-term view on our business strategy and talent strategy. So we call it our Vision 2020, where we want to increase our business fivefold by 2020. So talent strategy is a key part of it. And what we are looking at is how do we take the talent who are doing repetitive jobs and the value addition is either stagnant or declining, and take them, train them, move them into roles. Now, the way to do it is also, we find that there is incredible power in smaller teams. A group of 5 or 6 working on a minimum viable concept or a minimum viable product can do much more. So then you can scale that innovation. So we provide a lot more projects like that where employees can do it. So those are things that we are doing to kind of change that mindset. But I can tell you it's hard. It's not been easy, and it is continuous, and you have to emphasize it. But the critical piece is, as HR, our roles, we believe, is shifting. Our business partners have a clear mandate to know the business as much as the general manager of the business, right? So you are involved. They take customer meetings as well to make sure that we provide the best talent to the customer in our consulting business. So those are things that we do, and the role's changing that way.
Great. So from whatever you've talked to us about in the last 20 minutes, right, looks like there's a lot of things that are done differently and a lot of different things that have to be done. So if you were to summarize now, say, what's the new HR? If you were to say that in 3 sentences, what would those 3 areas be?
So from my perspective, if I look at it, there are 3 things. One, as HR, you need to continuously upgrade your talent. That is going to continue, and that will be a critical part of your role. If you want to take your company to the next level in the future, that is critical. It's the talent that matters. The other piece is you can cut down the layers in the organization and increase the speed and agility. You can do that by digitizing some of the processes, cutting down the red tape and all of that. So that's a critical role of HR. The core business processes need to be digitized with the help of HR. It may not be happening within the HR functions, but you should be able to influence with other business leaders and other functional leaders to make that happen. Focusing on a superlative employee experience is critical, because we live in a world where employees have choices. They don't have to work for your organization, right? How do you create a compelling experience that they feel like coming back? And everything that we do, we need to put the employee experience in the dead center of things and design it around it. So that is critical, because the world's moved on, right? It values experience much more than anything. And that's the world we live in, and we need to adapt to that. So those are the 3 that I would leave HR leaders with to do.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. We have a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to see if there's any questions from the audience. Anybody who has so there's a person there too.
My name is Arja. I come from an academic background. I'm an HR professor. So my question is very simple. You were looking for the right talent on campuses.
Yeah.
And though we have courses which are more about digitization and technology in HR, what else specifically in HR? It's a very selfish, question. What do you want us to teach in HR so that when they work in an organization like yours, they're already prepared for the kind of talent that you're looking for?
Yeah, the courses and our thinking has all evolved from the industrial era. It's 100-year-old. That is why silos exist. That is why hierarchy exists and all of that. I think the critical thing that you can do is, as you're teaching, you can do the case studies where how do successful organizations operate? What is different? How does, we talk about Netflix, right? Netflix has been able to launch themselves in 100 different countries overnight, giving no time and chance to the incumbents to respond to that. So how do they do it? What are the things? What is the HR culture? What is the culture HR is building there? What are their people practices? If you understand that and say, hey, that is relevant to win. If you look at today's market in the top companies with the highest market capitalization are all technology companies. How are they doing it? How does a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon build its culture? How are their HR practices dealt with? So I think giving an understanding to your students in HR about that would help them to come with an open mind, right? And I would say one thing, emphasize on business. And as HR professionals, we try to bring in a lot of people from the line jobs into HR. But I think it's time to be a net exporter of talent. So from HR, people should also eventually move into business and take business roles. And that shift will make a big change. So your students should be able to have an open mind to do that.
Good. There's probably one last question.
Hi, my name is Sukrit Ghosh. I represent DXC Technology here. My question is in sync with what she has already mentioned, that how do you bring about the change, the cultural shift? Because we are talking about digitalization, we are talking about terms like AI, machine learning getting implemented. So two parts to my question. One, how do you bring about the change? Because I believe the charity begins at home concept actually runs across all industries.
Yeah.
So how do you get the business to, how do you get the HR to learn the business when you talk about HR business partnering? First question. Second, when we implement these changes and we bring about this digital transformation, are we dependent on in-house workload or are we going through vendor-driven approach? And how are we articulating the authenticity of the findings, which can lay the foundation for a next set of actions?
Got it, yeah. So my take on that is, if you can take the HR team through these sessions. For example, when we did the conference, we had the HR team participate in it. We did a session for the entire business leadership on algorithms because, the future is about algorithms and you need to know, and everybody needs to know. So we had all the key HR leaders participate and understand what is algorithm and what does it mean and how does it work. So things like that, and I talked about, being familiar. Being familiar makes it less complex. So more you're exposed to it, the faster it seeps into the organization. Like you are not going to, as an HR professional, you're not going to sit and code or you're not going to create a product and all of that. But understanding that will help you to use the language and have that communication with your business leader so it looks very seamless. And that is critical for the change.
Thank you. I think we're out of time, but thanks for being a very patient audience.